The wind howled across the plains of Veracruz, kicking up red dust that clung to the armor of the royal guard. Princess Talira stood at the edge of her family's fortress, her silver eyes cold, distant, and full of dread. She was dressed in ceremonial robes, but to her, they felt like chains. Her people had lost the war to the Earth Coalition. The Verakian fleets had burned in space, and the proud warriors of her kind now answered to humans. It had been a short but humiliating war. Her father, the king, blamed his advisors. The advisors blamed the stars. No one blamed themselves. To avoid total destruction, the king struck a deal. Land, technology, and something far more valuable, his own daughter. Princess Talira was to be married off to a human commander in exchange for peace and mercy. The message was clear. This was no alliance. It was payment. She had never even seen a human up close. Only stories and blurry footage told her what they were like: shorter, clumsier, primitive. But the stories also whispered of their unpredictable strength. And something else, too, mercy mixed with madness. Her handmaidens adjusted her crown. Unaware of the storm inside her, Talira clenched her fists. She wasn't scared of the human, she was furious. She was Verakian royalty, not a piece to be traded on a galactic chessboard. But now she was going to be part of another species. Victory prize. The shuttle arrived with no grand entrance. A single human stepped out, wearing no armor, no cape, no weapon. He was tall for his kind, with messy brown hair, a scar near his eye, and a face that held no arrogance. Just tired calm. Commander Ryan Hayes looked at her like she was a person, not a symbol. He gave a respectful nod, not a bow, not a smirk, no smugness. That confused her more than any insult could have. She expected him to laugh, to gloat, to treat her like property. But he didn't. Their first words were spoken in silence. She stood tall, he waited. Then finally, in careful Verakian, he spoke. "I didn't ask for this, but I will not dishonor you." Talira blinked. Her rage didn't fade, but something in her chest shifted. Later, in the halls of her palace, she walked beside him during the binding ceremony. Priests chanted, guests stared. But she couldn't stop glancing at the human. He didn't stare at her like the others. He looked forward. Like a soldier at a funeral, she noticed how his hand trembled slightly when he took the ceremonial bondcloth. Not from fear, but from disgust at what was being done. Not at her, but at the deal itself, that made her hesitate. Just for a breath, but she did. When the bond was tied between them, it didn't feel like chains anymore. It felt unfinished. Like a sentence without an end. The priest announced them bound. The hall cheered. She did not. Neither did he. In the days that followed, no one asked what she felt. Her father celebrated. The humans left guards. Veracruz looked peaceful on the outside, but inside the palace, the air remained cold. Ryan didn't treat her like a wife. He treated her like a guest in her own home. He stayed silent, respected her space, and never touched her without invitation. That confused her more than anything. This was not how conquerors acted. She watched him one night, standing on a balcony alone. He spoke to no one. Just stared at the stars, like they had betrayed him too. Talira felt something unexpected: curiosity. The more she watched him, the more she wondered, why did a human act more honorable than her own counsel? Why did this stranger carry shame instead of pride? And why, when he looked at her, did her heart beat just a little faster? She didn't understand it. Not yet, but something inside her had begun to shift. Not surrender, not love, not yet. But a question. A dangerous, powerful question that changed how she saw him. Who was this man they had forced her to hate? Talira did not sleep that night. She lay in her room, watching the ceiling of carved crystalline stone. The silence outside was heavy, and her thoughts were louder than any battle drums. She was not afraid of the human, but she didn't know what to do with him either. He was not like the invaders from her ancestors' tales. He did not demand, did not shout, did not grab power with loud fists. He moved quietly, spoke calmly, and never crossed her line. That quietness made her uneasy, as if he was holding back something worse or something better. The guards treated him with uncertainty. Her own people didn't know if he was a prisoner, a king, or something between. He never gave orders, but neither did he bow. He listened more than he talked. That strange balance gave him a power no one could name. She watched him from the shadows of the palace halls. Once, she saw him helping a servant pick up scattered scrolls. Another time, he fixed a broken water pipe with his bare hands. No one asked him to. He just did it, like a man who couldn't stay still when there was a problem to solve. Talira asked her handmaiden if this was how humans behaved. The girl said no. She said most humans were loud and proud. That answer only deepened the puzzle. Ryan Hayes was a soldier who refused to act like a conqueror. He carried no sword, but he carried a burden. She tested him that evening. She invited him to a council meal, sat across from him, and stared. When he spoke, she interrupted. When he tried to explain a thought, she cut him off. She wanted to see the cracks in his patience. He did not crack. Instead, he waited after each interruption. Then he answered again, never raising his voice, never changing his calm tone. Her words had fire, but his words had weight. Some council members shifted uncomfortably. Her father watched in silence. After the meal, Ryan walked alone through the garden paths. Talira followed at a distance, unseen. She wanted to see what he did when no one looked. He sat by the pond, removed his boots, and dipped his feet into the glowing water. His face looked tired, not from war, but from life. He pulled a small object from his pocket. It was not a weapon. It was a photo, faded and soft from age. Talira stepped closer. She saw the image of two children and a woman. Their faces were human. Their smiles were gone now. He stared at it for a long time. She felt something break in her chest. It was not pity. It was understanding. He had lost something, maybe someone, maybe more than one. He wasn't just here to keep peace. He was running from something of his own. Not running with feet, but with silence. Talira left before he noticed her. That night, her dreams were not of war. They were of strange things, of questions she couldn't answer, and of a human face she couldn't forget. When she woke, the stars outside her window looked closer than ever. The next morning, she spoke to him without anger. It surprised them both. She asked him why he didn't fight back during the council meal. He replied, "Because I wasn't here to win. I'm here because people lost." That sentence stayed with her the entire day. She began to ask more questions over the week. About Earth, about human cities, about his training and how he became a commander. He answered carefully, never too much but never hiding. He had scars, but he never bragged about them. One evening, she asked if he believed in fate. He said no, he believed in choices. That if people made better ones, fewer wars would start. She nodded but said nothing. Deep down, she had always believed her life was controlled by others. Now for the first time, she wondered what choice would look like. What if she didn't just play the part of the traded bride? What if she became something else, something stronger? Something that had a voice in both worlds. The human had not conquered her, but he had changed something in her. He had not claimed her throne, but he had opened a door in her heart she had kept locked since childhood. Her eyes had always been sharp, cold, trained to see threats. But now, when she looked at him, they softened for a moment before turning away. And for the first time since the treaty, she didn't feel like a prisoner. Talira walked through the ancient library of the palace, a place she once loved as a child. Its high shelves were filled with knowledge from thousands of cycles. But today, the scrolls and tomes felt like ghosts whispering of a future she couldn't yet understand. She had spent days with Ryan, talking more than she ever thought she would. His presence no longer disturbed her. It challenged her. He didn't try to make her change. He simply listened, spoke with honesty, and gave her space to think on her own terms. Every time she tried to corner him with harsh words, he gave her answers she wasn't prepared for. Not because they were clever, but because they were honest. That honesty was rare in her world, where every word was coded in diplomacy and control. The more she listened, the more she noticed something dangerous forming. Not fear, not loyalty, but trust. And trust, she knew, was harder to earn than power. She was beginning to trust a man her people still called an enemy behind closed doors. The palace was quieter now. Her father stayed busy with Earth's envoys. The council whispered about her connection with the human. Rumors spread, soft as smoke but just as hard to catch. She ignored them, but she heard every word. One day, Ryan was summoned to a meeting with High Command. Earth officers had arrived on Veracruz to inspect the peace treaty's progress. Talira watched him dress in a clean military uniform, far simpler than her ceremonial armor. Yet he carried it with more pride than any royal cloak. Before he left, she stopped him in the hall. She asked why he always looked tired when speaking to his own leaders. His answer was quiet but sharp, because they see numbers, not names. Talira said nothing. She understood that more than he could know. That evening, she stood outside the chamber where the humans met. She didn't listen through the doors. She didn't need to. She could read it on their faces when they left. Some were pleased. Some looked unsure. But one man looked angry, not at Veracruz. At Ryan. Later, she asked Ryan what had happened. He hesitated before answering. He told her the truth. He had refused to support an earth mining project that would destroy an ancient Varakian valley, a place filled with memory, a place sacred to her people. Talira's breath caught. Not because he saved it, but because he defended her world even when no one was watching. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside her tilted. He had no reason to care. But he cared anyway. She invited him to that valley the next day. No guards. Number. Ceremony. Just the two of them. He agreed without question. They flew in a small craft, low and quiet over the hills, until they reached the valley floor. The light there was softer than anywhere else on the planet. She showed him the temple ruins, the crystal stones, the river that sang at night. He listened to every word, not as a guest, but as a student. She watched his eyes trace the carvings. He didn't just see beauty. He saw meaning. They sat by the river's edge, and for a long time, neither spoke. The silence was not awkward. It was full. It was alive. Then she asked him why he really came to Veracruz, not the mission, not the treaty, but the real reason. He looked at her, not with pride, not with shame, but with a deep sadness. Because I was tired of watching people break things they didn't understand. It was a human sentence, simple, heavy, real. Talira placed her hand near his on the grass. They didn't touch. Not yet, but the space between them was smaller than before. The silence between their words was no longer filled with suspicion. It was filled with possibility. She didn't know what that meant. But she didn't pull away. When they returned to the palace, her father called for her. His tone was sharp. His questions were colder. He had heard the humans were displeased with Ryan's behavior. He asked if she knew anything. She looked him in the eyes and said nothing. But deep inside, she made a decision. She was no longer a pawn in this treaty. No longer a gift to hold. A fragile piece. Something was growing between her and the human. Something her father couldn't control. And for the first time in her life, that thought gave her strength. Talira sat beneath the blue-leaf tree in the palace garden. Its branches stretched wide, offering cool shade even in the midday heat. She had spent hours here as a child, dreaming of battles and victories. Now she sat dreaming of something much more dangerous, Her thoughts were no longer her own. They returned to Ryan with a rhythm she couldn't stop. His words echoed even when he was not near. His choices stayed with her like fingerprints pressed against her thoughts. And worst of all, she no longer tried to push them away. He wasn't like anyone she'd known. Not the noble warriors, not the scholars, not the sharp-tongued lords of her court. He walked softly, but his silence spoke louder than their declarations. He wasn't trying to change her. But she was changing anyway. That evening Ryan stood at the southern gates, waiting. He had requested a private audience with the king, a move that surprised even the palace guards. No human had ever done such a thing without military approval. But Ryan wasn't acting like a soldier anymore. Talira watched from the upper balcony. She could barely hear his words, but she could feel the weight of them in the air. Her father stood like a statue, proud and cold. Ryan didn't flinch. He stood firm, hands behind his back, eyes locked forward. After several long minutes, her father turned away and left without a word. Ryan didn't follow. He stayed where he was, breathing slowly, like a man who had fought without a sword. When he finally looked up, their eyes met across the distance. Later that night, Ryan came to her chambers, not as a demand, but as an invitation. He knocked once and waited. She opened the door without a word. They stood in silence before she stepped aside and let him in. He spoke softly. "I asked your father to release you from the marriage bond." Her heart stopped for a moment. Her fingers curled. She didn't know what she expected, but not this. Not freedom offered by the very one who had every reason to keep her. He continued, "I want you to choose. If you want to stay, stay because you want to. Not because you were traded." His words were like a blade and a bomb at the same time. She turned her back to him, hiding her face. Her heart beat like a war drum. He stepped away without asking for an answer. The door closed behind him, and the silence he left behind was heavy. She looked around the room filled with gifts, scrolls, and symbols of status. None of it mattered now. Only one thing did. The next morning, she walked alone through the city streets, cloaked and quiet. No guards, no advisors. Just her and her thoughts. She watched her people move through their lives, some proud, some fearful, some still angry. At the presence of humans, she passed a group of children playing with sticks, pretending to be warriors and space pilots. One of them shouted, "I'm the human, I make peace." The others laughed and kept fighting. Talira did not laugh. She kept walking. At the edge of the city, she stood on a hill where ancient statues watched the stars. This was where heroes were remembered, carved in stone. She stared at the empty space beside them, wondering if one day, a statue of a human would stand there. When she returned to the palace, she went straight to Ryan's quarters. She entered without knocking. He looked up from a map spread across the table. She walked to him, eyes steady, heart full. She stood close enough to see the small scar on his chin. "I do not want to be released," she said. Her voice didn't tremble, "not because I was told to stay, but because I want to stay." Ryan didn't speak. He didn't need to. The warmth in his eyes was enough. They stood in silence, and it said more than any words could. That night, for the first time, they shared a meal not as strangers or soldiers or symbols, but as two people choosing to understand one another. The table was quiet, the air was soft, and her heart, once caged in duty, began to fly. The war had ended weeks ago, but something new had started. Not a battle, not a treaty, but something fragile and alive. Something not even the stars could predict. The days that followed were calm, yet filled with a quiet energy neither of them understood. Talira continued her official duties, while Ryan remained in contact with Earth Command. But something had shifted between them. It wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. They walked together in the garden now, not as strangers but as something new. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. It wasn't the words that mattered. It was the silence they were now comfortable sharing. Palace staff noticed it too. The way her voice softened when he entered a room. The way he listened to her with full attention, even when others dismissed her words. The bond that had once been forced was becoming something real, but peace has enemies. In the high towers of Earth's command, not everyone approved of what was growing between the commander and the alien princess. There were whispers of betrayal, accusations of weakness. Some believed he had gone native. One message reached Ryan through a secure channel. A warning, a reminder of his duty. The mission comes before your emotions. He read it twice then. Deleted it. He never mentioned it to Talira. But the message stayed with him like a shadow. Talira sensed it. His smiles were a little smaller. His silence lasted a little longer. One night, she confronted him beneath the stars. "Are they trying to pull you back?" she asked. He didn't answer directly. He just said, "I'm not sure where I belong anymore." She reached out and touched his hand. "You belong where you are respected, where you are needed." It was a simple statement, but it held more truth than any speech. Ryan didn't speak, but his hand stayed in hers. Later, in the royal court, her father made an announcement. A delegation from Earth would arrive in 5 days. They would review the treaty, inspect the region, and confirm Ryan's loyalty. The air in the chamber turned sharp. Ryan bowed his head slightly. Talira kept her face still, but her fingers tightened around the edge of her seat. She knew what this meant. A test, not of paperwork, but of purpose. The delegation was not coming for inspection. They were coming for judgment. That night, Talira walked the corridor with her mind racing. She had fought many battles with words, but this one was different. This was not about diplomacy. This was about proving the value of something invisible, something no treaty could protect. Ryan stood at the balcony when she reached him. He didn't turn when she approached. He just asked, "Will they ever see me as one of their own again?" She stepped beside him and answered, "They might. But that shouldn't decide who you are." He looked at her then, and she saw in his eyes a man torn between two worlds. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath. "Then stand with the world that needs you, not the one that doubts you." The next morning, Ryan requested to address the royal court alongside Talira. It was unusual, even forbidden by some traditions. But the king allowed it, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps to test him. The chamber filled with silence as he stepped forward. He didn't give a speech full of flair. He spoke plainly. He told the court what peace meant to him, what Veracruz had taught him, what Talira had shown him. He said he did not come to conquer or to rule. He came to learn. He turned to Talira and spoke not to her, but of her. He said she had the strength of a general and the wisdom of a queen. That through her, he understood what honor truly looked like. The chamber did not erupt in applause. It stayed silent. But the silence felt different. Afterward, she stood beside him as they walked through the long hall. "That was a risk," she said. He smiled, tired but firm. "Peace always is." She nodded and walked closer. That night, for the first time, she did not sleep alone. Outside, the stars watched quietly. They had seen many wars, many alliances, many betrayals. But what they saw now was something rare. A bond not forged by force, but by fire and choice. Asterisk. The Earth delegation arrived in sleek ships that hovered like silent blades above the palace towers. Their uniforms were sharp. Their expressions were colder than the mountain air. They came not as guests, but as judges. Talira stood beside Ryan. In the main chamber, her chin held high. Her people watched from the edges of the hall. Earth's banner hung beside Veracruz's crest, but the space between them felt like a battlefield. The leader of the delegation, Admiral Keen, had eyes like steel and a voice that carried no warmth. He greeted the king with formal words then. turned to Ryan without a smile. "Commander Hayes, your report has been vague," Ryan answered with calm restraint. "I've submitted every required update." The Admiral's lips thinned. "And yet, your loyalty has come into question. Your personal involvement with the princess has raised concerns at the highest level." Talira stepped forward before Ryan could respond. "Then question me directly," she said. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "If your concern is influence, know this: I'm not weak enough to be manipulated," the court murmured. The king narrowed his eyes. But Admiral Keene showed no reaction. "This is not personal," he replied. "It is policy." Ryan stood still, his face unreadable. But Talira saw the tension in his jaw. The next hour was filled with quiet interrogation. The Earth officers asked questions, with polite cruelty, about Ryan's decisions, about Verikis, about her. They called it a review. But it felt like a trial without verdict. Ryan answered every question with clarity. He did not deny his relationship with the princess. He did not hide his beliefs. He spoke of the culture he had come to respect, of the values he found among a people once called enemies. But the room was unmoved. Politics had no interest in truth, only control. When the questioning ended, the delegation retreated to their chambers. A decision would be made by morning, whether Ryan would stay or be recalled. That night, the palace was silent. Even the wind outside felt cautious. Talira stood on her balcony, watching the stars that had once felt like gods. Now they looked like watchers, waiting for a choice she couldn't escape. Ryan entered without a word. She didn't turn. She knew it was him by the way her heartbeat shifted. He stood beside her, arms folded, eyes distant. "If they take me," he said, "will you fight for me?" She turned to him slowly. "I already am," she said. Her voice was soft but solid. "I fought when I let myself care. I fought when I chose to stay. And I'll keep fighting because I refuse to lose what we built together." He touched her hand just for a moment. It wasn't about comfort, it was a vow. The kind that didn't need ceremony or witnesses, just presence, just purpose, just truth. The next morning, the decision was announced. Ryan Hayes would be recalled to Earth Command, effective immediately. No discussion, no explanation, just orders. Talira stood beside him as he read the message. She didn't cry, she didn't shout, but her silence was sharp enough to cut through steel. He looked at her once, and she nodded. Not as a goodbye, but as a challenge. He packed nothing. He took only what he had arrived with. As he stepped toward the waiting ship, Talira followed. The guards moved to stop her. She raised a single hand, and they froze. Even her father stayed silent. She walked beside Ryan up to the ship's ramp. Before he entered, he turned to her. "If I leave, it's not the end," he said. She answered without hesitation. "No, it's the beginning." The ship rose slowly, disappearing into the clouds. She stood beneath it until the sky was clear again. The world had not changed, but she had. And that meant everything. That night, she called the council to an emergency meeting. Her voice held no weakness, her eyes no doubt. "Prepare the embassy," she said. "I'm going to Earth." The embassy ship left Verikis under full diplomatic seal. It carried only a few passengers, but one of them was the princess of a conquered world. Talira stood at the window, watching the stars shift past her, each one a silent witness to her journey. She wore no crown, no ceremonial robes, just a simple cloak and a sharp gaze. She had left behind her father, her court, and her past. Not for politics, not for duty, but for something rare and living that could still be broken if she stayed silent. Earth loomed. Ahead, a planet of green and blue wrapped in gray skies. It was not what she expected. The cities were vast but not as cold as she feared. There were people everywhere, loud and alive. But none of them looked her in the eye. She was taken to the Earth Command Center under heavy escort. It was a fortress of metal and glass, built more for control than comfort. She walked through its halls with her head high, ignoring the stares, the whispers, and the fear behind polite expressions. When she reached the main chamber, she found Ryan seated before a tribunal of senior officers. His wrists were unbound, but his voice had been silenced. He had not spoken since his arrival. Not out of defiance, but because no one was listening. Talira stepped forward without permission. A guard moved to stop her, but an officer raised his hand. She walked to the center of the room, her presence loud without needing to raise her voice. The tribunal looked confused, uncertain, unprepared. She stood beside Ryan and addressed the room. "You question his loyalty, but I question your vision." Her words echoed off steel walls. "You sent him to lead. He led with honor. You wanted obedience. He gave you integrity. That is not failure. That is strength." Admiral King rose. Face tight. "This is not your court. You are not human." She didn't flinch. "No, but neither are your values. If you punish one of your own for showing compassion to a world you nearly destroyed." There was a long pause. Then, for the first time, Ryan spoke. "You gave me orders to bring peace. I found it. I protected it. If that's not what you wanted, then your mission was never about peace at all." Murmurs rippled across the tribunal. The officers looked at each other, uncertain. One of them stood and spoke softly. "You've caused trouble, Commander. But you've also prevented more. That's not something we ignore." The decision was not made immediately. Talira and Ryan were escorted to a private chamber. They waited in silence. She paced while he sat, his hands clasped, his eyes distant. He looked at her once. "You didn't have to come. I did," she said. "Because I won't lose. The one thing I chose for myself." He gave a tired smile. "You never stop fighting." She walked over and sat beside him. "Neither do you. That's why we found each other." Hours passed before the door opened again. The officers returned. The lead speaker looked at Ryan, then at Talira. "Commander Hayes will not be discharged. But his role will change. He will serve as Earth's ambassador to Verakus, under joint leadership with the princess." Ryan blinked. Talira stood slowly. "Joint leadership?" She repeated. The officer nodded. "It is clear that what you two built was not just personal. It was political, cultural, necessary. We either honor it or destroy everything we tried to build." Outside the chamber, the news spread quickly, not just on Earth, but across allied systems. The human and the alien princess were no longer just a symbol of peace. They were now responsible for maintaining it. Later that night, Ryan stood on the rooftop of the embassy, staring at the stars. Talira joined him, her cloak brushing his arm. He didn't speak, neither did she. They stood together. Two warriors of different worlds, united not by war, but by will. She turned to him, eyes glowing softly in the earthlight. "Are you ready for this?" He nodded. "With you, yes." Her fingers found his, and this time they didn't let go. They had survived politics, doubt, and separation. What came next was uncertain. But what they had now was stronger than any treaty. Asterisk, the embassy on Verakus stood taller than the towers of old. It was built not with force, but with compromise. The walls held the markings of both cultures. Earth's steel merged with Verakus crystal. Two emblems hung side by side at the entrance. Not as rivals, but as partners inside. Talira and Ryan sat in the central chamber. Maps of trade routes, education plans, and defense protocols were spread before them. Every decision they made had the weight of two civilizations behind it. And yet, they still found time to smile between the noise. Peace was never quiet. Disputes still rose. Accidents happened. Old wounds were slow to heal. But each day, they moved forward. Not with speeches, but with steady work. Ryan had traded his military rank for a diplomat's role. He had no medals now, just respect. Talira's people watched her closely, some with pride, others with suspicion. But none could deny what she had become, no longer just a princess, no longer just a symbol. She was now a leader shaped not by tradition, but by her own decisions. She walked through the city without a guard. People stopped to bow. Children waved small flags of both planets. In the market, a Varakian merchant handed her a carved statue of a human and a princess standing back to back. "For luck," he said with a grin. She took it, holding the weight of what it meant. Not everyone believed in this piece, but some did. And that was enough to keep building. That evening, she returned to the embassy, placed the statue beside the window, and watched the horizon change color. Ryan joined her, carrying 2 cups of steamed fruit tea. They stood side by side, sipping quietly. "The miners are requesting another sector," he said. "But it's near one of your sacred lakes." She raised an eyebrow. "Then they'll wait." They handled conflicts together, balancing pressure from Earth and concerns from Veracruz. There were days when one of them wanted to walk away, but the other always reminded them why they started, why they stayed. Why? It mattered. Soon, an invitation arrived from the Galactic Council, a summit of allied worlds. Both Earth and Veracruz were asked to attend. Talira and Ryan were listed as joint speakers. The news spread fast. Some cheered. Others plotted their journey to the council took weeks. During that time, they prepared for challenges far greater than war. War was easy. Words were harder. They practiced speeches, reviewed history, and planned for every question. But they also made promises, not to win every argument, but to speak truth. Not to dominate, but to lead with reason. When they arrived, the council hall shimmered with light from 1,000 stars. Each seat was filled with species of all kinds, some hostile, some curious. All watching, Talira spoke first. She spoke not of royalty, but of mistakes, of wounds from war, of lessons born from pain. She told the story of her marriage, what it was, and what it became. The room listened in silence. Ryan spoke next. He spoke of duty, of what it means to serve peace instead of pride. He admitted his doubts, his failures, and his hope. He pointed to Talira and said, "I was sent to keep her world quiet. She taught me how to let it speak." When they finished, the council paused. Then one by one, the members stood. Not all, but enough. Enough to show that something had changed. Peace was not yet guaranteed, but it had found a voice. After the summit, they walked alone under a sky filled with unknown stars. Ryan looked up and asked, "Did you ever think it would end like this?" Talira smiled. It didn't end. It began. They returned to Veracruz weeks later. The people met them with banners of both worlds woven together. Music filled the air. But the real celebration was not in the sound. It was in the way the two walked side by side, no longer as representatives, but as equals. In time, history would call them many names. The first bonded leaders. The bridge between two civilizations. The couple who ended a war with a choice. But they didn't care for titles. They cared only for the future they chose together. And on the balcony of their shared home, they stood each evening watching stars that once meant fear. Now they only meant hope.